I'm Lake Miller.
And I'm Hannah Brown. Welcome to Gem City Diversity, a podcast where we talk about diversity and inclusion in the Dayton area.
We're from the National Conference for Community and Justice of Greater Dayton, or NCCJ. NCCJ works in the Miami Valley to increase understanding around the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
In this episode, Lake talks with Amaha Sellassie. They discuss Gem City Market, starting a co-op, the terms food desert versus food apartheid, and building community. Enjoy!
I want to start today by saying, first of all, thank you for being here and taking some time to come out and talk with us. I always enjoy the conversations I get to have with you.
Likewise.
And I want to ask kind of maybe the dreaded question of just, would you mind taking a moment just to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Amaha Sellassie. I teach sociology at Sinclair Community College. And I'm just real passionate about community and like what we can be together and how we can utilize our gifts and talents for the benefit of the whole. I just believe that we are more already than we realize, and it's like how we just pull it together more. So it's kind of like my passion and focus.
That's awesome. And so you said you're the president of Gem City Market or Gem City Co-op? Right?
Gem City Market, yeah. It's a co-op, but we call it Gem City Market. I'm the president and one of the founding members.
Awesome. And so for people who are not familiar with Gem City Market, are you able to provide a little bit of background of kind of what the market is? And I know the conversations of the market started, 6 years or more ago?
Yeah, about 5 or 6 years ago, yeah.
Awesome. Do you mind kind of talking about what it is and maybe where those conversations came from?
Sure. So the Gem City Market is 15,000 square foot grocery store, 8,000 of it which is dedicated towards retail. We provide food to meet various needs in the community. We have a tiered structure as far as pricing. And then we also have a community room, a teaching kitchen, and a health clinic because we want to be a space where the community can come, get their food, gather, organize, really just be like a third space. So, you got your home and your work, but where do you go in the community to have community? And so we look at the Gem City Market as being that place, like a watering hole to help pull the community together because, we also understand that part of health is having deeper connections amongst one another in the community. And it came about due to the systemic underdevelopment of the West Side, and I would say intentional originally, and so these maps came out. Well, Kroger's closed on Gettysburg, and so it created this huge hole in our community, and so a lot of community members had to take 2 buses to get to Kroger's on Siebenthaler and 2 buses back, so you're looking at about 3-hour time, or you go to a dollar store or a corner store to get your food. So you're getting things that have high fructose corn syrup, processed food, lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. And so that combined with a study of the maps that came out that showed that when you're looking at opportunity, that the West Side of Dayton had low and very low opportunity compared to the East Side on looking at housing, jobs, access to food, parks, things like that. Community came together and wanted to see what we could do about it. And the need for a grocery store had some momentum, and so we continue to walk that out.
And I think it's so important you talk about this was intentionally done, and I think for a lot of people, a lot of people have gone through the Undesign the Red Line exhibit, for example,
right.
And and I think for so often, some folks I think were aware of the fact that redlining happened, but I know one thing people would say to me is well, redlining's illegal now, right? And so things have changed, people can get loans now, but it's so apparent when you look at the community that perhaps something is illegal, but there's lasting implications, and there's also things that are still happening that maybe shouldn't be practices that are happening, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's intentional in the far as that like these maps are created to decide how to develop the region, right? And so there's areas that we want to pool our resources in, which I call like a white habitus, like we pool our resources in these certain areas. Then there's other areas where we disinvested, right? Which ended up with the underdevelopment, right? And to me, like one of the striking things is that like W.E.B. Du Bois, the first African American PhD actually in sociology, he said that the problem of the 21st century is going to be the problem of the color line, right? And now we can see that color line translates as an opportunity line, like the line of access, right? And so you had, redlining is supposedly illegal now, right, with the Fair Housing Act, I think 1964. But you had about 30-some years of intentional underdevelopment, right, with no 30 years of intentional redevelopment or putting resources in the community, So it's kind of like left this way, and then, oh, yeah, everything's good now, we're going to move on, right? And so that just left a gaping hole, right? And so that's why, oftentimes people talk about food deserts, right? But we shift from that language because food deserts imply it's a natural phenomenon. And now you have things like book deserts and healthcare deserts and all these things. They add desert to it. Like anything that's bad, they add desert and they feel like they're woke, right? And but we use apartheid, right? So we say food apartheid because we want to acknowledge that it was human mechanisms that made it happen, right? So on one level, it's to show that it's a structural mechanism because structures are ideas that we put our resources to make it happen. But also, by showing that it's human and man-made, then it puts us in a position of power because now we can reimagine it, right? That's why, like, language, they say, is the key to social transformation, right? Like, you shift the language, you shift the narrative, right? And it positions us in a way that we can start building from there, right? And so when we say food apartheid, it allows us to know that we can unimagine, reimagine, which leads us to this thing of collective hope, right? Because hope is connected to our agency, our power, right? Like if I feel like I can't do anything, then I get hopelessness, right? And so when we realize that, oh, this was man-made, we can reimagine it, then that gives us hope, and then that gives us power, right, to build like, what is the vision of the community that we want to live in, work in, play in, right? And how we leverage our shared resources towards making that happen. And I think the Gem City Market is just like the tiny pebble, right, in this larger narrative, right, like how we're reimagining our community.
And that's like, one of the issues that we run into most often when we're dealing with people at NCCJ is it's easy when something doesn't affect you to, first of all, not realize it's even happening. But then even once we realize it's happening, to care, right? To care enough to do something that, for whatever reason, part of so many people's human nature is like, I've never had to go on that 3-hour bus journey to go to the grocery store. Now that I know it's a problem, I don't really know what to do about it. It's not really affecting me, so I'm going to keep going on my journey.
Right.
And to me, that feels like the biggest obstacle to overcome because I agree, we've got this market, that's fantastic, that's a step, but we know still that people in the West Side have less access to mental health care or specialized health care. We know that there's less access to opportunities, to outdoor, experiences, to all of these types of things.
Right.
And so I guess that's where I struggle is like, how do we get these folks who, even the people who understand that there is a problem, to say, I am now empowered to do something about that problem.
Right. Yeah, and I think even the market doesn't like, for all of West Side, it doesn't like eliminate food apartheid, right? You know what I mean? This is like a small piece in it. To me, I think like you said something earlier about being human, right? And so to me, I really think it's reimagining what it means to be human because we share a common humanity, right? And once we understand that, then we realize what affects one affects us all, right? Because we're interdependent by nature. And so once we realize our interdependence, then like King says, the single garment of destiny that we can't be who we can fully be until we're doing it together, right? And so it's really shifting how we see each other, I think. And so, I might not live in an area where some of these things are happening, this, that, and other, right? But like, how is that impacting me? How is that impacting the region, right? So like, like take school, for example, like the underdevelopment of Dayton public schools, right, actually hinders the region because people don't want to move into an area that has a school that is not, performing at a high functionality, right? And so it's like all these things play a role. So like it's like that butterfly effect, right? And so like it might not be a direct impact, but it's still an indirect impact, right? And so I think it's like understanding, it's learning. It's like, how do my actions unintentionally sustain the system that I'm actually opposed to, right? Because oftentimes we're blind to how our actions contribute, like I make a joke and I'm ashamed of the joke on some levels, right? Because like today, we're in December, 60 some degrees, you know what I mean? Like my selfish side, I don't like cold weather. So I'm like, oh, this is the type of winter I like, right? But I also know, right, that this type of weather happening in December means that like my daughter and my daughter's children and children's children are going to have an impact. You know what I mean? And so like, so it's like, what can I do to make a difference? What can I do to like really understand like how do I contribute to the problems that I actually want to solve? You know what I mean? Because like there's that invisibility, and so I think that can help us move forward and asking questions and understanding people that like centering the voice of those that have been most impacted into the center of the conversation, into the center of public policy. Because oftentimes people like that don't have an experience, they want to armchair quarterback what needs to be done out of even good intentions, right? But no, let the people that understand the issue the most are those that have experienced it, right? So let's center their voice and let's acknowledge their knowledge as actual knowledge and not just like some hearsay stuff. Like, no, this is a lived experience, right? Like we won't know the brunt of a system until you talk to the people that are experiencing the brunt of that system, that we can then unpack how it actually works in practice and not just like, how it's written on paper,
I love that, and I want to go back. Like, you talked about these very purposeful, intentional changes that people need to make to our own mindsets, and I think with so much of our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's unlearning those habits that we've had before, unlearning those mentalities, and shifting towards that purposeful mentality of bringing the people to the table who need to be at the table, or saying, okay, I can see how this affects me, or maybe even saying, I don't see how this affects me, but I see that it's affecting somebody, and so my human condition should be caring. We had a conversation that has really stood out to me about a year and a half ago with a gentleman who was in his 70s, and he said to us, like, I don't understand why we're still having these conversations today, because we had these same conversations 60 years ago, right? Yeah. He's like, why are we still talking about these things? Why have they not changed? And I tend to think it's because for a lot of people, when these conversations get tough, when they really talk about, okay, now I need to change my own self, the way I go about my life, I need to think about those jokes that are really microaggressions or these types of things. Like, that's when people start to back off or to shy away and say, hey, I've put my month in and now I'm out. Hopefully someone continues it.
Right.
But obviously that's not the case.
Yeah, like, for me, it's knowing that community is possible, right? And being the quest to know like what community is and how we can be in it together. If we're looking at it spiritually, if we're looking at it tangibly, and how they actually both agree, right? And so I think it's definitely a shift, right? And so to me, like, I challenge the dominant narratives, and the biggest one I think that we have to tackle as a country is independence, right? That like this notion that like we are somehow independent from everything else, and like what happens to me, what happens to me, what happens to you, happens to you. You know what I mean? Like, because like oftentimes, so like when we're looking at like systemic work, you got to start at the root, right? And the root assumption is independence, to the extent that we don't even think about it because we automatically just start building off of it. It's an assumed known, right? But I think that's the social construct, right? Because we're interdependent. You know what I mean? It's not even just humans. Like everything is interdependent, right? Like there's no way to get around it. Einstein has proved it. I mean, like multiple ways it's been proved. But we keep building our house, right, on really shifting sand instead of the solid rock of just what actually is reality, right? And building from there. And so like I think that's like one of the key pieces, because we keep going through these cycles, like you're saying, you know what I mean? And like, because oftentimes systems change and they come about a little bit differently, but some of the underlying assumptions remain the same, so we keep getting the same outcomes, right? So that's why I'm talking about like that deep work. And it sounds kind of heady, like, oh, what do you mean? Like, you know what I mean? But it really is like the underlying thing that then builds all of our thoughts, right? And then like, because structure, again, is ideology plus resources, right? And so we're talking about structures or how we arrange things in society. There's an idea that is trying to be attained. Like, for example, when we're talking about redlining, the underlying assumption was white supremacy, you know, that one group of human beings was distinct from all other human beings, and so we're going to pool our resources. So something that was unreal actually became real because of the resources that we put in it. We concentrated advantage in some areas and concentrated disadvantage in other areas, right? And so it's like, that was an idea, you know what I mean? And so like, what is an idea that, like, you know, how we acknowledge the dignity and worth of every human being and then build our structures to do that, right? And that's why I think I'm talking about like what we can be together, because I think oftentimes we set a low bar and a low standard and we want to kind of like shift little things here and there. But no, let's build an alternative space, you know what I mean? Like what can we be when we really live out our aspirations? Like between, I would say, might sound Pollyanna, but I would say, you know, 85% of human beings like believe in peace and want, you know, these type of things, you know what I mean? So like if these are our collective aspirations, right, then like what do we need to do to remove the barriers that we can step deeper into that, you know what I mean? And building deeper connections amongst each other, right? Because oftentimes, you know, like we like to say movements move at the speed of trust, right? And so like how do we build the deep relationships? Like they say critical connection more than critical mass, you know what I mean? Because like, you know, we need to be relational if we're interdependent, right? And so if we're interdependent, then love comes in. If we're interdependent, then grace comes in. If we're interdependent, then cooperation comes in. Like all these things come when we shift that underlying thought. You know what I mean? Because they're all like the if-then statements that proceed from ignoring our independence and living into it, you know? And, you know, I'm speaking more than I live, right? And so like my journey is like, how do I press deeper? What is the praxis of these things? Like, how do I embody these principles to show what is possible? Kind of like the 4-minute mile, you know? Like the more that I forget his name, like everybody's trying to break the 4-minute mile, and the same summer he did it, 2 other people did it, because now they saw what was possible. So to me, like the Gem City Market is also like a welcoming table, right? Like how do we actually build community? How we have this shared vision of like of our shared future, right? Because the thing is, like I used to say, building a shared future from a divided past. But that's not true, because we have a shared future regardless, right? Like that is part of what interdependence is, right? And so the question is, are we going to co-create our shared future together? You know, like intentionally, you know what I mean? Or are we going to like just leave it to the whims and see how the wind blows, et cetera, right? Instead of taking the power to determine as a community our direction and our future.
And I love this kind of idea of people see that it's possible, and now this is that stepping stone to go further. And I think for some people, they saw the Gem City Market get created, and for some, there was this idea that, look, we've achieved it, right? Like the food desert has been destroyed, and now it's an oasis, and we have all of this, right? Now, if you're really familiar with you know, West Dayton, you know that clearly one market is not, you know, sufficient. And so, you know, from your perspective, how is this market going to kind of serve as that stepping stone to say, what other resources can we bring?
Yeah, you know, I think that's a great observation and question. And like when I'm sitting here, when you said that, it reminded me of when Obama got elected. You know what I mean? Everybody like, yes, we high five, we did that. And then like, I'm one of them, you know what I mean? Like I went back and sat down and said, okay, you people do your thing. You know what I mean? But it's not that way, right? I think it's a continuous process of co-creation and co-participation in the future that we want, right? And so like now the market's open. Like how do we utilize the market, right? How does the market fit into the larger vision of who we want to become as a community? And how do we know that by shopping at the market, I'm actually like participating in the process, right, of building this new possibility of what we can be together and what kind of resources we can have at the community, you know? Like right now we have over 5,000 members, right? So like, how do we use that platform to then have conversations about like what are some other things that people are experiencing in the community? If it's lack of clean, affordable housing, or transportation issues, or parks, or whatever the issues that are resonating with the people, like how we use our platform that we co-created together towards doing that. And I think also co-ops are interesting, right? Because the co-ops are owned by the members, right? And so that's a shift from being a recipient to being an owner, right? And I would say a leader. Like we want a leaderful market. We want a leaderful community. You know what I mean? So it's shifting the paradigm of like how we define leadership, you know?
And why, can you talk about why was that done, right? I mean, I assume there was a strategic decision to say we want this to be a co-op owned by the community rather than bringing in another Kroger type industry. Like, what was that decision?
Yeah, I think, good question. I think we went with co-ops because we couldn't wait. You know what I mean? Like we had hoped a box store would come in, even like a Save-A-Lot or something, you know what I mean? But like, there was some conversations, but nobody entered the space, right? And so to me, it's like being the thermostat or the thermometer, right? The thermometer reads the temperature in the room, but the thermostat dictates the temperature in the room. And so like part of the community power is that like power as in the ability to change our lived environment, that like we can't wait for Superman. You know what I mean? Like if we don't do it, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when, right? And so it's like, so the co-op model was really the only pathway we saw. And I think like, redlining is an issue that affects all over the country. And every community that was redlined is 3 times less likely to have a grocery store and 3 times more likely to be like a food swamp, right? Where you have a whole bunch of abundance of things that you don't want. So that's a common phenomenon in all redline areas, right? And so right now, we're trying to figure out what ways that the community can do to realize its own power and actually like change its history, change its direction without having to wait, And so this seems like a good strategy, and it's been used in the Black community for years. Because the Black community has used co-ops as a means of liberation for a long time, right? When it comes to anything from mutual health insurance and all these things, we've always had to do things together. And so yeah, it just made sense.
And that term that you just used, food swamp, I'm assuming that some of our listeners will not have heard that before. Can you talk more about what you mean by a food swamp?
Yeah, sure. So a food desert is like a lack of access to fresh fruits and vegetables within like a 1-mile radius, and it's tied to a poverty line too, right? Food swamp means that you have an overabundance of things that you don't want in the community, right? So you have an overabundance of fast food, high fructose corn syrup, processed. You just have like an overabundance of things that are actually, I want to say like negative for the body. And the key thing, right, is that when we're talking about community and community structures, that to me, food is like the canary in the coal mine, right? Because you can't have food insecurity without having a whole bunch of other things happening at the same time, right? We're talking about, mass incarceration and all kind of things. It's an interconnected web, right? And so to me, it's a canary in a coal mine, and it's the easiest way to activate the community, because most people agree that kids deserve to be fed, right? And they deserve to have nutrition, that they can go to school and perform at a high level instead of getting a super donut at school in the morning, right? And so so it all comes together as a web, right? And to me, it's like the more we understand like how these things work, the better we can act from wherever we are and our positionalities and our gifts and talents and yeah.
Well, and one thing that's always really stood out to me looking at this situation is, our food is really connected to our health at the end of the day. And when we look at these communities that are typically food deserts or food apartheids, they're typically also really missing healthcare in general. We saw the closing of Good Sam. There's not really specialists or these types of medical institutions. And these things to me are seemingly incredibly connected. You don't even have access to that good nutrition. That compounds the health issues, and now we don't have a place to go and get that health care, if we even have access to insurance or anything of that sort in general, right? So I don't know how to, I think looking at these issues, and I love when we looked at the market that was part of the components, right? You talked about medical care right off the bat when you talked about the market.
Right. Yeah, that came about, because of the closing of Good Sam, and yeah, it's definitely it's a web, right? And it's understanding like what do we need in our community to thrive, right? Like what do we need in our community so people can flourish, people have access to opportunity, access to resources, that we can live more into our full potential, on a structural level, because oftentimes, like even like looking at social determinants of health, which, like housing and access to healthcare, transportation and parks and jobs, all these things, we really need to look at the structural determinants of health, like who's making the decisions that then show up as the social determinants of health, right? Because then we're going deeper down the rabbit hole. We're going more upstream, right, to understand like how policy is being formed and created. What are some of the underlying assumptions and this, that, and the other that is ending up with, lack of healthcare or whatever. It's deep, right? And I think a lot of this comes down to like how we understand blackness and the definition of blackness and what black deserves, right? Because even sometimes the quality of healthcare is different, and different tests are done, right, based upon their perception of insurance and African Americans are less likely to get some tests that are supposed to be done. You know what I mean? And so like how all these things, black women are less heard and believed when they say they have problems, but like Serena Williams, you know what I mean? So that tells us it's not even a money thing, right? It's deeper than that, right? And so to me, like part of reimagining blackness, right, is that like racism as a whole is not my sickness. Now I've lived here, so I've experienced some of the impacts of that, and I have to unlearn, like everybody else, you know what I mean? I have to unlearn my own internalized oppression. And I also have to unlearn, how I see others and this, that, and the other. It's a process we all have to go through, right? But when I say reimagining blackness, I think it's like, how do we see humanity as a whole, right? Like our common humanity, you know what I mean? Like in South Africa, there's a principle called Ubuntu. I am because you are, and I can't be all that I can be until you are all that you can be, and vice versa, right? And so to me, like reimagining blackness is reimagining how humanity sees each other. So like the thing that was used as the vehicle to separate is now, I think, the balm or the cure to help bring humanity together as we reimagine what we mean to be human. You know what I mean? Like in the full sense of the word. I know it sounds like heady and this, that, and the other, but it's real because it's like all these things, we're looking at gender, race, class, age, sexual orientation, all these things are like these social constructs that we've created and gave meaning to, and then we created scripts that say how we're supposed to interact and treat each other based upon that, right? So we have to unpack all of that because all of these are things that are not natural, you know what I mean? And not real, you know what I mean? And if you want to get biblical, you know what I mean? There's no more Jew, Greek, and Gentile, but one inside of him, right? And so it's like, in multiple ways, right? It's like how we realize that we truly are one people. And I think the virus has shown us this, right? Because look, you can try to isolate COVID and this and other, but look, you know what I mean? Like until we see that like this is a global situation and we treat it that way, it's not going to resolve. I mean, we're sitting in here wearing masks, in a conversation because of that, right?
I was thinking about some of the connections even to COVID when you were speaking earlier about kind of this this thought of independence, right? And how I think a lot of our reality today is based on this steadfast notion that people have of independence, right? If we switch our COVID mentality from I'm out here living my life, having a good old time, and it's my my business, to wow, we really need to affect the global population. How does that change our perception of COVID and the public health response to COVID tomorrow? Yeah. We're looking at COVID from I want my individual ability standpoint right now. I think. True.
And that my actions don't have repercussions on other people. And I think that's where it's what can I do for the benefit of the all, right? And how can I be a friend of humanity, right? This is a global phenomenon, and I think we need to understand how things fractal up. Because even going to your question you said earlier, right? Man, all these big things, if I look at everything, I will just be overwhelmed and retreat. I'll get froze. I mean, God, I can't, you know what I mean? But what can I do as an individual, right? And that's why I keep coming back to what I can manifest myself, right? The biggest thing I can do is for me. Is to show that something else is possible, you know what I mean? And I'm not even talking about the grocery store. I mean, great, you know what I mean? I love it, right? But more as a human being, how can I show that love is possible? You know what I mean? How can I show that there is a next type of fellowship, you know what I mean? That we can be in amongst each other, because that just opens us up to possibility, right? And so understanding the fractal nature, right? How things fractal up, right? And so the small then creates the large, right? And so what can me as a small little human being, a little speck in this big thing, right? How I can help be a spark, you know what I mean, to help something else generate and flourish, right?
So I want to shift a little bit towards kind of community organizing, and I think when we look at the market, somewhere down the line, somebody or some group of people had an idea and made something really fantastic out of that idea. We work a lot with youth and with young people who are refining their leadership skills. And for those people who are entering a space, they identify that there's a problem, they've identified some sort of gap, and they've decided, we got to do something about this. What are your recommendations for folks who are first entering that community organizing space?
Yeah. Adrienne Marie Brown, she says that organizing is science fiction, right? Because we're creating this thing that isn't yet, And so to me, for those that I think youth need to know that sometimes they say, they're future leaders. No, they're leaders now, right? You can lead where you're at. I think it would be the most important lesson. And knowing that leadership is action. You know what I mean? You're taking action. You can gather people together, understand the issue more. Talk to those that are most impacted, right? Allow their experience drive some of the processes of how you're putting things together, or how you're joining organizations or connecting with people that are also doing this work, right? To me, one of the biggest principles in all this is participation. And because participation brings hope, it releases power, and it's co-creating. I just think I'm just real big on co-creating, and I'm real big on not having just one leader. They're you know what I mean? Because from all the reasons, I mean, they could die, they could whatever, they could move, you know what I mean? But still, it's you want the ability to act to be dispersed amongst the people, right? And so when a young person sees an issue that either it's directly impacting them, or they've heard about something, you know what I mean, I would suggest learning more about it, talking to the people involved, knowing that you can make a change and make a difference. You can bring people to a room that might not be in the room, right? And for youth, I mean, I think who doesn't want to support the leadership development in the youth? You know what I mean? So yeah, step out there. You know what I mean? Even I tell my college students, it's yo, now's the time, man. It's if you go into these rooms, they will help support you. They'll provide a mentor network around you. You know what I mean? So use that time, man, to develop your network, develop your relationships, bring people together that might not come together, you know what I mean, to really like press the envelope and move conversations forward.
And I think for some people, the fear becomes the fear of the no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like someone's going to say no to me. And I'm assuming, in looking even at the market, there had to have been some no's along the way, right?
Plenty.
So how do you go from like, I got a no, and someone said no to me, and I'm like, well, that was a bummer. I put my all into it, and now I'm going to be done, to, all right, I got a no. How do I adapt and move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably counts on like what the no is. You know, like some no's can be the pathway to a yes, right? You know, because like some people say, you know, you can't have an authentic yes without an authentic no, right? I think it's like continue to refine and tweak the vision, continue to find and retweak the ask, and you know, systems don't always want to change, right? So it's like the key is being able to hold the space long enough, because everything has to adapt. Like if you were talking about like black and white marriage, you know, it was illegal at one point, but people did it, they held the space around it, and then the whole system had to bubble up and adapt, right? And so I think like, you know, not being discouraged, right? And continue to find your people, because best and believe you're not the only one that's having these ideas, right? And so like, how do I find more people that are also like-minded, that we can continue to develop our thoughts, our process? And I said participation, but participation to me is within the process of something called praxis, right? Praxis, which is like, how do I bring theory into action, right? So it's theory, I try the theory, and then I reflect, which is like, oh, this worked, this didn't work, but then tweaks my theory and then starts the cycle all over again, right? So like, how do we birth it? You know, birth our ideas, you know what I mean? And that's the power that we have as individuals and as groups, you know what I mean? And so I think it's keep pressing, you know what I mean? And like we have plenty of no's. I mean, we have people saying we're gonna steal money. I mean, like that y'all making this up, it's not possible. And keep in mind that for the market, areas that have been intentionally underdeveloped for that long, there's high promise and low follow through, right? So and that's traumatizing, you know what I mean? So we had to fight through all of that, you know what I mean? But we just kept pressing, you know what I mean? And we believed change was possible. We believed something else was possible, and we just kept pressing and putting little pebbles here, little pebbles there, gathering more people that put their little pebble in, and it just kept growing and building momentum, you know? And so, and also knowing that it's a marathon and not a sprint, or like, you know, when my elders will say ultra marathon, you know what I mean? And so it's like what we're doing now that can last, you know what I mean, for future generations, like the pyramids. I mean, pyramids outlasting everybody, you know what I mean? And they're like, they built to last, right? And so like what are we doing now that the future generations, like even like in First Nation tradition, right? Like you make decisions based upon 7 generations. So if my children's children is not going to be impacted in a positive way, I don't take the action today, right? And so I think when we look at interdependence, we look at this mind shift, it's like, how are we acting now for those that we will never meet, can live in a world that embodies the aspirations of humanity, you know?
Yeah, and I love that. And I think that can be so hard for us. I mean, when we look at like a grocery store, I can see approaching that from like I'm hungry today. Like, yeah. I have the food need today. But looking, like you said, all these generations forward, or even looking again at the 61-degree December weather that we had today, mm-hmm. and saying, you know, well, that's comfortable for me today, but what does it look like for 7 generations?
Right.
I think that's awesome. And I think that the market has done a wonderful job of saying we're this starting point and inspiring conversations and showing people this is possible. Mm-hmm. I mean, I heard, and I wasn't even involved with the market, but I heard people all the time saying like, yeah, it may not open, right? Like, mm-hmm. it may not get there. Sure. Was that ever a reality of yours, or going into that conversation, was it I'm going to make sure that this happens?
Yeah, I mean, it was always a possibility that it I don't know if possibility that it wouldn't open, but like, it might take a lot longer, like we probably open a little bit ahead of the curve as far as like, like some stores take 10 years to open or something
Wow.
like that, so so I think we knew it would happen, but it was just a matter of time, and that part, like, we didn't know, and it really, it was a testament to how the Miami Valley responds. Like if you look at the tornado, if you look at the tragic shooting, like there's something about this area, that we rise to the occasion, because at that time we were second in the nation for food insecurity, right? And so all these things kind of come together, and the community responded, and like, I know it's different than what you're talking about, but like sometimes like, you see me or Leela or Leah and different people in the front, but like man, there's so many people. There's the Corinnes, right? There's like Chef Thomas's and like multiple people in the background that like have been like helping and building. Annie, like Kenya, it's like that behind the scenes have been helping make this happen, right? And so I really want to make sure I acknowledge that, this process. And so I just took the gap when I saw it. But
It was a hard journey, but I think also, I think it's so important you kind of acknowledge prior to even talking about this, like, you're not looking for that quick fix. It wasn't, let's open a market tomorrow that maybe lasts 10 years, but let's look at this long-term vision of kind of how do we reinvent this area. So I think that was exactly perfect.
Cool.
So for folks who are interested in, I guess, learning more about the market or becoming a member, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. You can go to our website, gemcitymarket.com. You can come by the store. I want to say it's like 324 Salem Avenue, right at the beginning of Salem on the left-hand side. Share your thoughts, share your ideas, right? Like, because we continue to co-create together. It's really important to shop there. Like they say that like when you build it, they will come. You know what I mean? And so some people have like high-fived and be like, yes, we did this thing. But like, no, it's important that we shop there, right? That like, let us know if there's things that are not there that you want to see, because we're co-creating it together and we're figuring out our product mix, but like shopping is one of the biggest things that we can do, right? To ensure success, ensure that, we're developing programming for youth. We got these little youth carts in there a couple of days ago, or, you can reach out to me, internationalmorality@gmail.com. Leah Behan-Harris, who is our extraordinary general manager. I cannot remember her contact information right now, but it's on the website. And, we welcome everybody to be engaged and involved and, like, just add your piece to this puzzle because, like we're not used to that. You know what I mean? Like, I know I've said it 1,000 times in this interview, but it's like, yeah, like, add your piece, add your brick, right, to this. It could be an idea. It can be volunteering. It can be shopping there. There's multiple ways, that we can be engaged and involved. But it's a way to bring the community together in a process of like living into our shared future, because we need we need more than one grocery store, right? And we need it in different areas, east and west, and like this is the process. So to me, it's part of like how we can bring community together, and using the market as a vehicle or a means or a platform, right, to give us that experience.
And so real fast here, kind of at the end of this, I know all the way at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned that this is a third space for the community. It's another place for the community to come together. And that's very different than our grocery experience typically, right? Like, sure, we're used to, I try to get in and out of the grocery store as quickly as I possibly can, right? But you just mentioned these kid carts, and I'm curious, for someone who's going to the market, what types of other services might they expect to see in a given week or in a given month?
Yeah, thank you for that question, right? We have a teaching kitchen, right? And so there's various type of classes. If you want to learn how to make something, you want to learn how to make something healthier, right? We got different chefs from, different cultures that are sharing their traditions, and someone wants to share their recipe or something with the community. You know, that's a great space. We have a health clinic. On Tuesdays, I want to say we have Moms at the Market. We're providing support for new and expecting mothers. We developed a doula co-op as well, and so the doula co-op is helping out with that. You know, you can get different type of testing at the market, some basic services. Then we have the community room where you know you can host a meeting or a gathering. Or we have yoga classes in there. We're gonna have a drumming circle there pretty soon, right? And so really, it's like all possibilities open. It's just kind of like what we want to do, we can do. And yeah, I think that's it. Plus, you know, just having a great experience, right? It's different walking in there. It's not like a Kroger, and even Dorothy Lane, which you know is an amazing grocery store, right? But it's a next kind of feel, like real. You can feel community inside of it.
So my last question, of course, we addressed the elephant of the room of COVID, right? Have you seen the role of the market change as you approach the pandemic?
You know, like Kroger's became Kroger's because they went to this different model, and like the old model became obsolete. I don't even know the names of the stores. That like the supermarket became a supermarket, became the thing, right? If we would have been open before COVID, I think it would have hurt us because we wouldn't have been able to adapt. And like, so we were at a cusp. We were in the phase when it happened, and so we were able to make some adjustments, which I think like helped us like move into what is society is calling for in this hour beyond COVID, but COVID kind of ushering in these transformations and changes. And it's affected our supply chain tremendously, right? Like even like something breaks down, like can't get a part, you know. Getting access to the food supply dramatically reduced by COVID, right? There's this huge block, you know what I mean? That everybody's experiencing, and inflation, right? Like right now, like prices are higher, you know what I mean, because of you know, going from a shutdown to like a reopening quickly, right? And like that gap, right? And that like the momentum it takes to do that is bringing inflation, you know, temporarily, hopefully, but yeah.
And at the beginning of COVID, or perhaps still, were there vaccines being offered in your clinics at the market? We do in the clinic now. Well, actually in the community room, because the clinic, you know, isn't really big enough to be able doing them like that in a major way. And we had I'm not sure if it was Premier, or I can't remember what it was, but like there was a bus that came outside, parked outside, and did vaccines, you know, early on, you know what I mean? And they still do. I saw, I want to say Equitas was in there a couple of days ago doing something, you know, and so. So yeah, it's definitely available. And if you're a healthcare practitioner, you know, if you want to do massages or, you know, acupuncture, different things, you know, we got the clinic has 2 office rooms, or, you know, like, I don't know what you call them, beds and rooms inside, you know, and so if people want to give their gifts to the community that way, they can as well. Great. Well, I really appreciate you sitting down with us today. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I thank you, Blake, for having me. I know I'm super random, so I know you're like, man, how the heck can conversation go? You know what I mean? But I appreciate your patience, and I appreciate your time, and you ask great questions. And I just want to thank again the community for all the amazing work. You know, the Hope Center. I mean, like, there's this amazing work happening all over the place, and it's really inspiring. You know what I mean? Because like Peter Beckendorf often quotes, you know, it's like, instead of focusing on tearing down or, you know, transforming the current structures, let's build an alternative so appealing that it makes the old obsolete. You know what I mean? And that's why I keep looking at community is possible, that light is possible, all these things, right? They're like how we can be what we can be together. And then in that process, you know what I mean, everything else transforms and changes, right? And so I'm just thankful for everybody allowing me to be in community with them, and I look forward to continuing the journey.
Well, great talking with you as always. I appreciate it.